For centuries, the medieval world was shaped not only by kings, knights, and castles, but by fear, a fear carefully engineered, a fear deliberately cultivated, a fear enforced by methods designed not simply to punish the body, but to command obedience from the soul. In an age where law was fragile and authority was often questioned, rulers, inquisitors, and warlords turned to instruments that transformed pain into power. These devices were crafted with precision, not for cruelty alone, but to send a message: defy the order of the realm, and the realm will break you before it kills you. Some methods targeted honor, stripping a person of reputation long before touching their flesh. Others focused on endurance, tests meant to force confessions, extract secrets, or crush rebellions before they ignited. And while many of these practices were rarely used, their reputation alone was enough to silence thousands. From cold stone chambers beneath fortress floors to hidden rooms of city courts, these methods became symbols of control. They warned peasants, nobles, and even warriors that no one was beyond the reach of judgment. And in each device, each interrogation, and each public display, the medieval world revealed a darker truth. Fear was often more effective than force. Today, we revisit these 20 medieval torture methods not to glorify them, but to understand the world that created them, a world where justice, superstition, religion, and politics intertwined so tightly that pain became a language spoken by empires. Torture in the medieval world was never just a punishment carried out in dark chambers. It was a carefully engineered instrument of authority. Rulers, inquisitors, and local magistrates understood that maintaining order in a society filled with rival factions, fragile laws, and constant threats required more than armies and decrees. Fear, visible, memorable, and unforgettable, became the ultimate weapon, and torture, or even the rumor of it, was the sharpened edge of that weapon. Most people in medieval society would never witness these methods firsthand, yet stories about them traveled far beyond castle walls. A whispered description of a device, an overheard tale from a passerby, or the distant cries heard from a fortress prison created a power that no sword or shield could match. Those in authority did not need to apply torture widely. They only needed the public to believe they were willing to. This belief alone kept rebellions small, confessions quick, and social order intact. By understanding this dynamic, it becomes clear that torture was less a physical practice and more a psychological system. Its purpose extended far beyond the chambers where interrogations took place. When a ruler displayed such tools in public or allowed rumors about their severity to spread, they were shaping perception. A peasant who considered challenging a tax, a noble who thought of shifting loyalties, or a soldier tempted to desert, would often rethink the matter after hearing what awaited those who defied authority. And this recalculation happened long before any chains were prepared or any interrogator was summoned. The method worked because it exploited the human mind's ability to imagine suffering far worse than reality. At the same time, torture reflected the insecurities of medieval governments. Authority was rarely absolute in those centuries. Kings contended with ambitious nobles, cities defied monarchs, and religious courts enforced their own forms of justice. This competing landscape made rulers constantly anxious about threat, real or imagined. Torture became a language of dominance, a way to demonstrate that power did not rest solely in titles or armor, but in the ability to instill obedience. Even when used sparingly, it signaled that the ruling order had both the will and the means to crush dissent immediately and decisively. Moreover, those who designed or wielded these methods understood the psychology of fear. A device did not need to cause extreme physical harm to be effective. It only had to look intimidating. Iron spikes, shackles, cold stone tables, and heavy wooden frames were crafted not just for their function, but for their appearance. Visual impact was a crucial part of the system. When an accused person was led into a chamber and saw instruments arranged neatly on the wall, their resolve often weakened before a single question was asked. Confessions came faster, accusations were settled quicker, and truth, whether real or forced, was delivered with less resistance. In this sense, medieval torture was a performance of power. It was a theater where the audience was not only the accused, but the entire population watching from outside the chamber's door. Every rumor of suffering, every exaggerated tale, and every whispered warning contributed to that performance. And through that performance, rulers reinforced their authority, not just with force, but with fear, discipline, and psychological domination over the minds of their people. In the medieval world, the threat of physical suffering was powerful, but it was often the psychological dimension of torture that delivered the true blow. Authorities understood that the mind could fracture long before the body did, and they used this insight with chilling precision. Many methods did not rely on sharp blades or crushing mechanisms, but rather on anticipation, humiliation, and the erosion of a person's dignity. In these moments, the fear of what might happen became more devastating than what actually did. Medieval interrogators learned to weaponize silence, darkness, isolation, and uncertainty. They discovered that when a person was unsure of their fate, every minute felt like an eternity, every sound became a threat, and every shadow took on the shape of imagined pain. This manipulation of the mind turned even simple confinement into an ordeal powerful enough to break the strongest resolve. Psychological torment also targeted identity. In a world where honor, reputation, and social standing mattered as much as life itself, methods that disgraced or exposed a person could be more damaging than any physical injury. Being forced into public humiliation, being stripped of titles or symbols of status, or being displayed before a crowd weakened a person not only mentally but socially. To lose dignity was to lose power. Torture chambers were not always hidden. Some were placed within sight of the public, allowing everyone to witness the consequences of defiance. This created an internal terror. People imagined themselves in that position, imagined the shame, imagined the loss of respect, and they quickly learned to avoid anything that might lead them there. Another psychological tactic relied on the unpredictability of the interrogation. Medieval authorities rarely revealed when a session would begin or end. Prisoners could be left in a cold cell, waiting for hours or days, hearing faint footsteps or distant clanking of metal, never knowing when their turn would come. This uncertainty slowly unraveled their sense of time and stability. A tired, sleepless mind became easier to persuade, easier to intimidate, and easier to convince that confession, true or false, was the only escape. Sometimes interrogators didn't even need to apply force. The mere suggestion of what could happen was enough to secure compliance. Even the design of the chambers played a psychological role. The dim lighting, the echoing stone walls, and the deliberate placement of intimidating instruments all contributed to an environment where imagination filled the gaps. The human mind naturally gravitates toward fear when confronted with unknown possibilities. Medieval interrogators relied on this instinct, allowing victims to mentally envision the worst before anything had even begun. Through this, terror became a self-inflicted force, and a far more efficient one. Ultimately, psychological torture in the medieval era exploited the deepest aspects of human nature: fear of pain, fear of disgrace, fear of the unknown, and fear of being forgotten or powerless. It showed that breaking a person's will required far less physical brutality than one might expect. The mind, when pushed into darkness, became its own tormentor, making the entire system more effective without the need for constant physical violence. This subtlety made psychological torture one of the most powerful and insidious methods of control in the medieval world. In a medieval world without modern forensic science, where evidence was scarce and testimonies were often shaped by fear, suspicion, or political pressure, torture became a tool to uncover what authorities believed to be truth. Confessions were seen not only as proof, but as the very foundation of justice. Yet the methods used to obtain them often revealed more about the priorities of those in power than about the guilt or innocence of the accused. Interrogators knew that when faced with the relentless pressure of question, combined with the looming threat of physical or psychological suffering, most people would break. Fear clouded memory, desperation altered perception, and the overwhelming desire to end the ordeal pushed countless individuals to admit to acts they had never committed. Confessions became less a reflection of reality and more a product of the environment created within those dark chambers. Secrets were another prized objective. Medieval rulers, inquisitors, and military leaders believed that hidden plots and conspiracies were constant threats. Every rebellion, every heretical movement, and every act of treason was thought to begin with whispered conversations in the shadows. Extracting information from captives, rivals, or suspected enemies became a critical part of maintaining control. Even when the information was vague or uncertain, the act of questioning itself revealed loyalties, fears, and weaknesses. Those who interrogated prisoners learned to look for hesitations, inconsistent stories, or signs of panic, believing these reactions pointed to concealed truths. Whether the information gained was accurate mattered less than the belief that torture could expose everything that had been hidden. Silence, too, played a significant role. The refusal to answer questions was seen not as a right, but as a form of defiance. In the eyes of medieval authorities, silence suggested guilt, or worse, rebellion. If a prisoner remained quiet, it was assumed they were protecting someone, hiding a plot, or deliberately challenging the authority of the court. Interrogators pushed hard against this resistance, convinced that their methods could shatter even the strongest resolve. They believed that the body would betray what the lips concealed, and in many cases, silence was eventually worn down through fear, exhaustion, or despair. What followed was often a confession crafted not from truth, but from the need to end the suffering. This cycle created a legal system in which evidence became secondary. A confession obtained under pressure was often valued more than witness testimony or physical proof. Courts trusted the process, believing that no innocent person would admit to wrongdoing unless faced with undeniable guilt. This belief, however flawed, shaped countless verdicts and influenced how justice was carried out across kingdoms, cities, states, and religious institutions. Torture intertwined with law in a way that made the distinction between truth and survival nearly indistinguishable. In the end, these methods served not only to obtain confessions, secrets, or compliance, but to reinforce the dominance of those who controlled the machinery of justice. By making the confession the centerpiece of the legal process, medieval authorities ensured that people feared not just punishment, but the process itself. And in that fear, they found a powerful tool for suppressing disorder, silencing dissent, and maintaining the fragile balance that held their world together. Every device used in medieval torture carried a meaning far beyond its physical structure. These instruments were crafted not only to inflict pain, but to represent the authority, ideology, and identity of the powers that employed them. When a person entered an interrogation chamber, they were not just facing iron and wood. They were confronting the symbolic weight of the crown, the church, or the ruling elite. Each tool was a reminder that the state controlled the body, the narrative, and ultimately the fate of every individual within its domain. This symbolism made torture a psychological battlefield long before any physical suffering began. Consider the design of these devices: heavy iron frames, intricate restraints, intimidating silhouettes, and sharp edges that glinted in torchlight. Many were constructed to look far more terrifying than the pain they actually inflicted, because appearance alone could achieve what force sometimes could not. The moment an accused person saw such instruments neatly arranged along the walls, their mind filled in the blanks. Imagination exaggerated the danger. Fear magnified every shape, every shadow. This visual impact was deliberate. Those who crafted these tools understood that terror began with the eyes. A device did not need to be used often. It only needed to be recognized. Beyond their appearance, the placement of these instruments was deeply symbolic. Some torture chambers were positioned below castles or courts, symbolizing the power of authority pressing down on the people, literally and figuratively. Others were placed near public squares, reminding passers-by that justice could reach anyone, anywhere. Even the sounds associated with certain methods, creaking wood, clinking chains, the echo of footsteps across stone floors, became part of the symbolism. These sounds drifted through corridors and courtyards, creating an atmosphere of dread that extended far beyond the walls of the chamber. Different devices also communicated specific messages. A restraint-based tool symbolized domination over movement and freedom. A device built to stretch the body symbolized the power of authority to pull apart lies or resistance. Tools designed for confinement sent the message that the state controlled time, space, and the very environment a person lived in. Each method reflected the values of the institution behind it: discipline, obedience, confession, spiritual purity, or political stability. Whether used by military leaders, religious courts, or city magistrates, these devices acted as embodiments of the ideals those authorities wanted to enforce. Even the rituals surrounding torture had symbolic importance. The lighting of torches, the reading of accusations, the presence of scribes or judges, each element reinforced that torture was not a spontaneous act of cruelty, but an organized expression of power backed by law or religious doctrine. The accused was made to feel that they were not suffering because of one person's anger, but because the entire system had deemed it necessary. This sense of inevitability broke resolve long before a device was touched. When a person believed they were facing the full weight of an institution, not just an individual interrogator, resistance seemed pointless. Symbolism also shaped how communities perceived these methods. Stories of torture devices spread rapidly, often exaggerated, transforming some tools into legends. These legends became cultural warnings passed down through generations. The device itself might have been used only a handful of times, but its reputation lived on, influencing behavior and shaping public fear. By embedding these instruments into the collective memory, authorities strengthened their ability to maintain order without constant violence. The symbol was enough. Through these layers of meaning, visual, spatial, ritualistic, and cultural, medieval torture devices became more than objects. They became powerful symbols of an age where authority relied on fear to maintain stability. Their presence alone communicated messages that laws and proclamations could never match, making them essential tools for shaping obedience in a world where power needed to be seen, felt, and remembered. Studying medieval torture reveals far more than the tools themselves. It opens a window into the harsh, complex reality of a world struggling to define justice, maintain control, and preserve order in times marked by conflict and uncertainty. The methods used were not inventions of cruelty for its own sake. They emerged from a society where danger was ever present and authority constantly tested. Understanding these practices helps us see the medieval era not as mindlessly brutal, but as a world shaped by fear, faith, political ambition, and the urgent need to protect fragile systems of rule. Life in those centuries lacked many of the protections we now take for granted, and the harshness of the methods reflected the harshness of the times themselves. Medieval communities lived under threats that were both internal and external. Banditry, feuds between noble families, religious conflicts, wars for territory, and shifts in royal power created a volatile environment. Without strong institutions or reliable investigative tools, leaders believed that severe measures were necessary to enforce stability. Torture became a mechanism not only to punish but to assert the strength of the ruling order. It served as a signal that the authorities were capable of confronting chaos and crushing disorder before it spread. From their perspective, the survival of the realm justified methods that today seem unthinkable. These methods also reveal the medieval understanding of morality and truth. Societies believed deeply in divine justice and saw earthly punishments as reflections of a higher order. Confessions obtained under pressure were often considered spiritually valid because suffering itself was viewed as a path toward revealing one's soul. While this belief may seem misguided now, it shaped legal systems across Europe for centuries. It explains why physical and psychological torment became intertwined with the search for truth. The idea that pain clarified conscience was widely accepted, making torture appear not only useful but morally justified within that context. Furthermore, examining these practices helps us understand how power operated in the medieval world. Authority was rarely absolute, and rulers constantly negotiated loyalty from nobles, military leaders, religious figures, and the general population. Torture became part of the political language of the time, a way to demonstrate decisiveness, strength, and the willingness to enforce the law with certainty. The emphasis on public order meant that any perceived weakness could be exploited by rivals or rebels. Thus, methods that today seem extreme were seen as necessary acts of governance in a society built on fragile alliances and shifting loyalties. These practices also offer insight into the cultural mindset of the era. Medieval societies valued honor, reputation, and obedience, and their systems of enforcement reflected those priorities. Torture was deeply connected to the belief that discipline maintained civilization. It exposed the fears of a world that felt constantly on the brink of unrest, where even small acts of disobedience could spark larger conflicts. The presence of these methods shows how communities tried to safeguard themselves against uncertainty in an age without stability. Ultimately, looking back at medieval torture methods is not about judging the past by modern standards, but about understanding how societies evolve. These methods reveal a world wrestling with insecurity, searching for justice with limited tools, and relying on fear to achieve order. They remind us how far humanity has come, and how important fairness, rights, and ethical governance are in shaping a just society. In the end, the story of medieval torture is not simply a chronicle of devices or punishments. It is a reflection of the world that created them, a world where leaders struggled to control chaos, where justice was shaped by fear, and where truth was often tangled in superstition and desperation. These methods remind us how fragile authority once was, and how quickly power could shift when challenged. They reveal a time when stability depended on the belief that suffering could protect order, and when the threat of pain carried more weight than the blade of any sword. By examining these methods today, we are not searching for horror, we are searching for understanding. We look back to see how human societies evolve, how justice transforms, and how ideas of morality change with time. The medieval world was harsh, but it was also a world trying to survive with the tools it had. These practices stand as reminders of how fear shaped an entire era, and how far we have come in our pursuit of fairness, dignity, and truth. Thank you for joining us on this journey into history's darker corners. Your time, your curiosity, and your willingness to explore the past keep stories like these alive. If this exploration helped you see the medieval world with new perspective, consider supporting the channel, sharing this video, and joining us for the next chapter in our search for the forgotten, the mysterious, and the untold.